Okay, we're going to talk about creating enemies in formation so you don't have to go in and individually place them. We've used for loops a little bit before, and I'm going to use them again for this particular exercise. So first of all, we're in a create function. As you can see up here at the top, we're in a create function, and we are in an object called control, which control is just going to do the basic setup of the room. It doesn't even have a sprite associated. So right now I have a room. I have put the player in it as we saw before, but all I've else put in it is control. I haven't put any enemies in it whatsoever. And what we're going to do is we're going to spawn those enemies in the room using a spawner and a for loop. So let's talk about that for a moment. So first, I want to keep track of the number of enemies we have. So I just made a global enemy count equal to 0. And then the next thing I do is I use a for loop. So this is kind of a funky way to set one up, but it works. So we're going to start I off at 100. And then as long as I is less than 900, and I counts by 100. So basically, I is going to run through this loop 8 times. It's going to go through once as 100. It's going to go once through as 200, and then 300, and then 400, and then and it's going to end at 800. So these are going to be pretty good X values for my enemies. So that's all I'm going to do is I'm going to say, while this loop is running, instance create. And instead of using an X value, I use the value of I, which again, first time is 100, and then Y value I just got set at 100. Second time will be 200, 100, then 300, 100, then 400, 100. And again, it'll just keep going there until it'll place the last sprite there at 800, 100. And what I'm placing is object E40. This is the enemy that's worth 40 points, and it'll be at the top of our grid. All right, so again, I'm counting by hundreds, and then I'm adding one to global enemy count each time. So what you can see is as soon as I start this program and run it up, you'll find out that it just puts on a nice little quick 8 enemies, boom, and that score eventually is going to be the actual game score. But right now I'm just using it as a temporary holder, and I'm counting the enemies. I'm going to make sure my enemy count is right, and that's how many I got on the screen. So that's exactly what I wanted. So let's see if we can put on a couple more rows, because the next 2 rows are both E20 guys. So I'm going to see if I can show you how to put this on E20. So we're going to go here and we're going to go, okay, this actually looks pretty good. So I'm just going to take this whole bit of script right here and I'm going to copy it. So I'm going to hit Control C for copy. I'm going to go down 1 or 2 spaces, hit Control V for paste. Now I'm going to go ahead and tab all these over a moment. I'm just clicking in front of the line and hitting the tab bar, because what I'm going to do is called nest them in another loop. Okay, 4. And so the first for loop said do these 2 things right here. And so it created 1 row of enemies. Well, the second for loop, I want it to do that twice, because there's 2 sets of E20 enemies. So I'm going to basically create a loop that only runs twice. Remember, between I is equal to 100 and 900, I counting by hundreds, this one ran 8 times. The loop I'm going to create now is only going to run twice. So I'm going to use a J. Okay, for J equals, let's start this one off. And I tried this before, and 200 was too many. So I'm going to only go down 50 this time. So instead of the X values will still space by 100, but the Y values are only going to space by 50. So I'm going to say from 50 and then semicolon, J is less than, I only want it to run twice. So I want it to run at value 50, and I want it to run at value 100. So therefore, I'm going to say as long as J is less than 101, we're good. But just for fun, because I'm numbering by 50s, I'm going to call it 150. And again, we're going to jump J by 50s. J plus equal 50. Okay, so now this will run the very next thing below it, and the very next thing below it is a for loop. So it'll run that entire for loop twice. So instead of just going in here and looking at I, I'm also going to replace 100 with J. Okay, so not only use I as a coordinate, it also uses J as a coordinate. This still tracks enemies on the screen, and since we've already said it once, I won't say it again. This still does the same loop, so once I say it once, I'm not going to say it again. And I'm going to put in a couple more things here just so we can see what's going on. I'm going to get rid of this one, and I'm going to say this one. Oops, I got a little error in there. All right, that should be better. For J equals 50, comma, J is less than 150. That should be a semicolon. And there we go. And so this guy runs a loop 2 times. If I can spell loop. Once as J equals 50, and once as j equals 100. Okay. So then it'll stop after that. Oops, sorry, this last one should say j plus equals 50. That's better. So j is 50, j is less than 150, and I'm going to jump j by 50s each time. So this time I use j as the y value. So it'll do the y value once with I as 100 first and j as 50 first, and then it'll run it through again and go again. All right, so the only problem I have here is I already started this at 100, so I've totally confused myself, and they'll run over top of each other. So I actually had better make this one 150, and I'm going to make this one 250. So j is actually going to go through first as 150, and j is going to go second through time as 200. And since those are y values, they'll actually be below this y value, which is 100 here. Okay, so again, I'll just leave this up here for a moment. J is 150, J is 250, so that means it goes through as 150 and it goes through as 200, and then I just use it as the y value. So it uses I as the x coordinate, and comma, I guess I can say uses J as the y coordinate. Okay. All right, so if we run it, we should find out, I hope anyway, that it'll keep track of our enemies, and they should be 24 now. And then also we should have 3 rows, and the only thing I forgot to change is I forgot to change the enemy. So I've got all enemy E40s here, which I wanted some E20s. So I just go back to the control, I go back to the create, and right here in the loop where it says create E40, we're going to create E20. And now it'll run. And so the next thing you got to do is you just got to go through and run the same thing again. So I'm going to go ahead and create those just so you can see it happen. I'm going to copy the 2 nested loops into each other. Control C, copy. I'm going to go down a couple, Control V and paste. And I'm going to do, let's back this up a moment. So this one's going to create, I'm going to give you a little line in here. So we create the last 2 rows of enemies. I'll show you the changes we should make. So obviously these are only E10s, so that's the first thing because I forgot it last time. So those are enemy E10s coming in. It's still going to create it with I and J. It's still going to create the X values exactly like we have. So the only really thing we have to go in is change the J values. So since our last thing we did up here was 200 and 150, then instead we want to start at 250. So we just change this to 250 in the front. So we're going to start J at 250. And we're going to stop J at 350, which means the only thing I really have to change in the notes is it runs it 2 times, once with J as 250 and once with J as 300. And again, so this should put it right underneath it again. Still, the enemy count should go up by another, 16 this time. So our enemy count should be like 40 on this particular instance. And again, I'm using the X values for I's, and I'm using J because there's only 2 different rows. I's are the columns, J's are the row. The X values, they run I's, and there's 8 of them. And the J's, they run the Y's, and there are only 2 of them in each loop. So if I run this now, I'm hoping what we should see is another 2, and we should still keep track of enemy count. And so now we've got our enemies on the screen, and they're ready to come advance and start trying to kill us. And that's probably good enough for today. But putting in grids of enemies using for loops is what we talked about today. Thanks.